It is October 1944. A small village near Toul, France, sits quietly under a gray autumn sky. In the backyard of a stone farmhouse, a 19-year-old American radio operator sits on a wooden crate, his equipment buzzing softly. An 8-year-old French boy stands beside him, watching the dials turn with wide, fascinated eyes. The soldier smiles, points to his own chest, and speaks a single English word. The boy mimics the sound, laughing when his pronunciation misses the mark. It is a scene of quiet, ordinary humanity in a world torn apart by war. But within hours, this simple exchange of language will be branded a military crime, triggering an official investigation that threatens to destroy the young soldier's future. One man intends to break this connection. He does not know that George S. Patton is about to dictate a response that will echo through the ranks. This is the story of what Patton did when an arrogant captain tried to court-martial a private for teaching English to a French boy named Pierre. Before we continue, make sure you subscribe. We tell the World War II stories that show what happened when mercy was the only crime that mattered. What Patton did. When a captain tried to court-martial a private for teaching English to a French boy, named Pierre, the American soldier, was Private First Class Albert Kowalski, 19 years old, from the gritty steel town of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. He belonged to a frontline communications squad, serving as a radio operator. Back home, Kowalski was the eldest son of Polish immigrants who had arrived in America in 1920. He grew up in a loud, cramped household, leaving behind two younger brothers, ages 12 and 9. He missed them terribly. Every time he looked at the young French boy in the yard, he saw his own youngest brother looking back. Kowalski was a gentle soul who had enlisted to fight, but he had not lost his humanity in the mud of France. For him, being kind to a lonely child was not a military strategy. It was simply who he was. He spent his evenings sitting on an upturned crate, sharing his chocolate rations and writing English words in the dirt. The man who watched him from the shadows was Captain Lewis Reed, 36 years old, from Topeka, Kansas. Reed was a discipline and unit cohesion officer who had spent 14 long years in the regular army, yet he had never heard a shot fired in anger. He had never seen combat. His entire career was built on paper, regulations, and administrative control. His uniform was immaculate, his boots polished to a mirror shine, untouched by the frontline mud. Reed viewed the chaos of liberated Europe not as a human triumph, but as a dangerous breakdown of military order. In 8 months, he had filed 23 separate charges against American soldiers for improper contact with civilians. He had no children of his own, and he possessed no understanding of the French people. To Reed, a soldier giving a piece of candy or teaching a word to a local child was a security breach. It was a violation of protocol that threatened the very fabric of army discipline. He stood by the gate, eyes narrowed, watching the 19-year-old radio operator laugh with the local boy. It was October 1944. The rain in northeastern France did not fall. It hung. A gray, cold mist choked the valleys around Toul, turning the limestone ridges into slick, treacherous barriers. The Third Army was stalled, not by the Germans but by gasoline. The tanks of the 20th Corps sat silent in the mud, their tanks dry, their crews shivering under canvas wraps. The rapid dash across France had ended in a grinding, stationary waiting game. Soldiers lived in close quarters with the people they had just liberated. In dozens of small villages, American GIS slept in stone barns, shared rations with French families, and waited for the supply trucks to find them. This proximity created a strange, fragile peace behind the front lines. Most officers understood the reality. They looked the other way when a private traded a pack of cigarettes for a fresh egg or gave a handful of lemon drops to a child who had not tasted sugar in 4 years. It kept the men sane. It kept the locals friendly. But some men in the rear echelons did not look away. They saw the chaos of occupation not as a human situation, but as a breakdown of regulations. They filled their days with paperwork, looking for infractions in the mud. The front line was 5 miles east, where the artillery thudded against the stone hills. But in the village lanes, a different kind of conflict was taking shape over a handful of words. Captain Lewis Reed stood under the stone archway of the Lefebvre barn. Rain dripped from his helmet onto his polished leather boots. He held a clipboard under his arm. Captain Daniel Riley, the company commander, walked up the muddy lane, wiping grease from his hands with a rag. "Captain Reed, what brings you out to the company area today?" Riley asked. I am conducting a discipline inspection, Reed said. Look behind that woodpile. Riley looked. Private Albert Kowalski was sitting on an upturned crate, pointing to a small radio logbook. The French boy, Pierre, sat on a smaller log next to him. Hello, Kowalski said, pointing to his own chest. Hello, Pierre repeated, laughing. That is a direct violation of standing orders regarding civilian contact, Reed said. He is 19 years old and he is teaching an 8-year-old boy how to say hello, Captain. Riley said. The kid brings him cookies. Kowalski gives him chocolate. It keeps the boy out of the communications tent. It is unauthorized social interaction with a foreign national minor, Reed said. It is a security risk. He is using military time and equipment for personal civilian contact. The radio is off. Captain, Riley said. The equipment is secured. The private is on his scheduled rest period. Regulations do not have rest periods, Reed replied. I have documented 23 separate instances of this kind of lax enforcement across this sector. It destroys unit cohesion. If we allow privates to fraternize with locals, we lose control of the occupation. He is not trying to control the occupation, Riley said, his voice tightening. He is missing his little brothers in Pittsburgh. I do not care about Pittsburgh, Reed said. I care about the manual. I am filing formal charges against Private First Class Kowalski. Conduct unbecoming, non-authorized interaction. You cannot be serious, Riley said. I am entirely serious, Reed said, writing on his clipboard. I demand Kowalski be removed from this billeting area immediately. Furthermore, I am recommending your squad's billeting privileges in this farmhouse be revoked. They can sleep in the mud until they learn to follow orders. I will not forward those charges, Captain, Riley said. Then I will go around you, Reed said. I will take this to 3rd Army Legal. It will be on the colonel's desk by tonight. The report reached Patton within the hour. Patton arrived within the hour. His jeep pulled up to the gate of the headquarters compound. 4 stars on his helmet gleamed in the October sun. Ivory revolvers rested on his belt. The general walked in unannounced. Everyone in the room registered his presence. They stood at attention. No one breathed. Patton did not raise his voice. His voice was quiet, but it carried. He looked at Captain Reed. Are you the officer who filed these charges? Patton asked. Yes, General, Reed said. I am. You believe this private has violated military discipline? Patton asked. His eyes were cold. He has. General, Reed said. He engaged in unauthorized social interaction. It undermines our authority. Patton studied him. The silence lasted for 10 seconds. Then he spoke. Captain, you have been in this army for 14 years. Patton said. You have never heard a shot fired in anger. You have never crawled through the mud under machine gun fire. You sit in a warm office. You look at pieces of paper. You find crimes where there are no crimes. You see an American soldier teaching an 8-year-old child to say thank you, and you call it a violation. You see a boy giving a soldier a cookie, and you call it improper contact. You have filed 23 of these reports. 23 times you have tried to punish men for being human. You have tried to make kindness a court-martial offense. Patton took a step closer. The ivory grip of his revolver caught the light. We are not here just to kill Germans, Patton said. We are here to bring back a world where people can speak to each other without fear. This private did more for American relations in 3 weeks than you have done in 14 years. He showed that child what an American looks like. Gentle, decent, Kakend, you want to lock this private up. You want to take away his squad's privileges. You have 2 options. Pick one in the next 10 seconds. You will withdraw these charges right now, or I will have you broke to the ranks and sent to an ammunition dump in Cherbourg. Either way, this ends today. Reed went pale. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. He reached for the paperwork on the desk and signed the withdrawal. The general's order took effect instantly. The paperwork disappeared into a desk drawer, never to be seen again. A corps adjutant drove out to the small village near Toul the following morning. He carried a single sheet of paper bearing the 3rd Army commander's personal seal. Private Kowalski was cleaning his radio headset in the backyard of the farmhouse when the jeep arrived. The adjutant handed him the note. The text was brief. It told him he had done nothing wrong. It ordered him to continue teaching the boy. That evening, the autumn air turned cold. Pierre walked into the yard at his usual time, holding his small notebook. Kowalski did not look over his shoulder for inspectors. He sat down on the wooden crate and pulled out a chocolate bar. He handed the note to Pierre. The boy could not read the English words. but he pointed to the bold signature at the bottom and looked up. He whispered the general's name with wide eyes. Pierre ran into the farmhouse and returned with his mother. Madame Lefebvre read the typed lines slowly. She began to cry, the tears marking her worn face. She kissed the young private on the cheek, then turned back to her kitchen. 10 minutes later, she returned with a fresh plate of warm cookies. The lessons resumed in the fading light. Albert Kowalski returned to Pittsburgh after the war ended. He used the GI Bill to attend college, choosing to study the language he had first encountered in that French backyard. He became a high school French teacher, spending 38 years instructing teenagers in the Pittsburgh public school system. He lived a quiet, full life, always carrying a deep fondness for the people of France until his death in 1998. Captain Louis Reed left Europe on the first available transport. He spent the remainder of the war managing a supply depot in Kansas, isolated from combat operations and stripped of his disciplinary authority. He retired from the military shortly after demobilization, returning to administrative work in Topeka, where he lived out his years in bitter obscurity until his death in 1967. General Patton never mentioned the incident in his official briefings or his public addresses. He kept the original report, along with his copies of the dismissed charges, filed away in a personal locker. In a letter to his wife later that winter, he noted that the true measure of an army was not its ability to terrorize civilians, but its capacity to leave them better than they were found. Some historians have argued that strict enforcement of anti-fraternization policies was necessary during the chaotic liberation of Europe to maintain professional distance and protect troops from potential security risks. They maintain that administrative officers were simply following directives designed to prevent exploitation and preserve order. Others have argued the opposite, asserting that rigid bureaucratic regulations often crushed the very humanity the Allies were fighting to restore, alienating the local populations who had just been freed. What is certain is that the interaction between the young radio operator and the French child left an enduring mark of American decency in that small village near Toul. If you had been in Patton's position, would you have done the same? Or would you have simply dismissed the charges and left the overzealous bureaucrat in his post? Let us know in the comments. And if you want more stories about when mercy was the only crime that mattered, make sure to subscribe.